Okay, today there's a couple things we have to tackle. We're going to do the tile wall behind the sink, and then also later on we're going to actually install the vessel sink and all the plumbing that's involved. Now, tile work has always been a bit daunting to me. I've always been a bit fearful of trying it myself, but today it's finally time to learn. Now, to make my first time tiling nice and simple, I specifically chose a tile not only that I really like, but one that's also very cheap. It was only 99 cents a tile, but also size-wise, I chose a tile that would fit perfectly horizontally across the length of the wall, including grout lines. And then for the vertical length of the wall, I plan to do 2 full rows of tile, leave a space for a custom-sized mirror that I'm going to make later on, and then 4 full rows of tile. By doing it this way, it'll make the pattern of the tile much more cohesive, and you'll see that later on. But also, this will enable me not to have to cut one single tile down to size. The only thing I'm gonna have to do is cut one little hole in one of the tiles so that the vanity light wires can come through. Now, this should all make a lot more sense later on in the video, but by doing this should make my first time tiling much more pleasant. I feel like I'm kind of cheating a little bit, but whatever. I decided to go with these unique handmade Turkish tiles. I want this wall to really make a statement, so I thought this pattern was perfect. These tiles are made of porcelain and they are 8" by 8". The first thing I did was find the center of the wall and the top of where I want the mirror to be. Here I will put a ledger board. This will make a lot more sense later. I drilled a piece of wood into the studs. This will be a temporary support for the tiles above the future mirror. Then I use a laser level. I will primarily be using this vertical center line as a reference. Here are some of the tools I will be using: a sponge, a notch trowel, a grout float, a small square trowel, and 1/8 inch tile spacers. Instead of using traditional mortar, I will be using this pre-mixed tile adhesive by Mape. This stuff is easy to work with and sticks more like a glue than a cement. This is great for smaller tiles and tiles that won't be getting very wet. I use the margin trowel to scoop some adhesive onto the notch trowel. Now just slap some on the wall and make a mess. I use the flat edge of the trowel to spread the adhesive, and then at a 45-degree angle I use the notch side to create some grooved vertical lines. The grooves allow air to be trapped behind the tile and provide kind of a suction when the tile is pressed. Next, I back buttered each tile before putting it on the wall. This will really help so that the tile is properly embedded. I started at the center line and added spacers to the bottom edge. Then I just continued the process and added spacers between each as well. After the first row, I decided to check my coverage by pulling off one of the tiles. After pressing the tile and collapsing the ridges, the goal is to have as much of a solid layer of adhesive as possible. You want to aim for 80 to 90% of adhesive coverage. If you don't have quite enough, be sure to add more adhesive and/or adjust the angle of the trowel. When adding a tile, place it directly next to the previous one. Press it back and forth, then push it away from the grout lines to add the spacers. This will collapse the ridges and help keep the spaces between the tiles free of adhesive as much as possible. After a while, it's just all about finding a rhythm and repeating the process. The lower section is finished. Now it's time to start the upper. Rather than continually climbing up and down the ladder, I eventually recruited my twin brother to help me back butter each tile. This really helped to speed things up. Clones are good for something, I guess. Now I needed to make a hole for the electrical wires to go through. To do this, I used a special diamond drill bit. Since it was a bit difficult to get adhesive on the wall in this area, I simply troweled the ridges directly on the back of this particular tile. After letting this dry overnight, I started removing all tile spacers in preparation for the grout. For the grout, I'm using another pre-mixed product by Mape. This stuff has quartz in it, which gives it a sanded appearance. For this, I will be using a margin trowel and a grout float. Add some grout to the float and press it into the spaces at an angle. Try not to press at a parallel or perpendicular angle because you will wipe away too much of the grout. Also be sure not to put grout where the tile meets the side walls, the countertop, and the ceiling. This will get caulked later. After waiting a bit, I wipe the tiles with a wet sponge. I noticed that you don't want to let this particular grout sit too long. It will be really difficult to get off if you do. Once again, it's very important to wipe at an angle to the grout line so you don't remove too much within them. It's best to work in small, manageable areas rather than doing the entire wall and then coming back with the sponge. After all grout was done, I let it sit for a bit and then went back with the sponge to remove any haze. Now I could remove the ledger board. I must say, not too bad for my first time. The next thing I had to do was address the large gap at the ceiling. The ceiling in the bathroom is crooked, so I brought the tiles up to the lowest point of the ceiling and decided to fill the rest with drywall mud. The proper way to fix this would have been to float the ceiling, but that just seemed way too difficult and time consuming. With drywall mud, you want to do multiple thin layers. So I added a small amount, let that dry, then added some more until it was flush with the tile. Now while that drywall mud fully dries, I can move on to installing the light bar. So the original vanity light was towards the left side of the wall above the sink. However, I want the new light to be centered on the wall. At first I opened up the drywall to see if maybe I had some extra slack to move the wires to the center. However, there wasn't what I needed, so rather than add an unsightly junction box, I decided to just patch up the wall and alter the light bar. I will simply make a new hole towards the left where the existing wires come from the wall. I drilled a small hole and then I used one of these spade bits to drill a new larger hole. Now in order to ensure that the wires would not be rubbing against any sharp metal edges of the new hole, I added a rubber grommet. If it's the correct size, you can maneuver it into the hole and it will wrap nicely against the metal edges. Of course, when working with electrical, be sure to shut off the power first. Now I could slide the light bar plate over the wires. You can see that the rubber grommet we added fits perfectly in the hole in the tile so that it's nice and flush with the wall. I made sure the wall plate was level and marked the holes. For this I will be using another diamond grit drill bit, but this time a little bit smaller. Spraying some water on the area first will help keep the drill bit cool. Then you want to start drilling at a slight angle while slowly working your way to a perpendicular position to the wall. Since I will not be in a stud, I will be using some anchors. These things get pushed into the holes, then the screws will be able to expand them for a nice tight and secure fit. If you don't feel comfortable doing this, obviously you can hire an electrician, but honestly this stuff is pretty basic. White goes to white, black goes to black, and green to green or copper and to the metal wall plate. The last thing to do is push the front cover on and screw in place. I switched the power back on and now there's actually good lighting in this bathroom. I just love how simple and minimal this light is. Now back to the ceiling edge. I gave the drywall mud a good sanding and threw on a coat of primer. So you can see where the ceiling dips down here, but now it's way less noticeable. And from a distance, it practically disappears. Now for the rest of the edges, I will need to add some caulk. I will be using the Mappe Cara caulk that matches the grout that I used. I masked off each individual area so there was way less of a mess. Now I could add some caulk and wipe it smooth with my finger. Adding the caulk really does help to blend everything together. Okay, now for the sink install. Now, there are many firsts in this bathroom renovation series, and installing a sink and doing the plumbing is definitely one of them. I purchased a really sleek, modern, rectangular vessel sink online, and then I also ordered a matte black faucet from Amazon. Like everything else, I'll try to leave links down in the description so you can check any of these out. I'm going to start by installing the faucet, and to do this, I'm just going to simply follow the instructions that the faucet came with. First the base plate, then the faucet and faucet lines, then these two washers, then this nut which I tightened with the included tool. Okay, so the drain that came with the vessel sink that I ordered was a polished silver. However, I wanted it to be black, so I decided to just paint it. I took everything apart and gave all the pieces that will be visible a good sanding. The paint will bind better this way. Then I masked off anything that didn't need to be painted. I sprayed it with a couple coats of primer, and then some matte black paint. When installing the drain, I will be using some plumber's putty. The drain comes with rubber gaskets, which probably would suffice by themselves, but I figured adding the plumber's putty would just be an extra line of defense against leaks. Leave me a comment below if you think this is terribly unnecessary. Once again, I am not a plumber. All you do is just roll some up, wrap it around, and then shave off the excess. And I will do the same for the bottom side. Now I could add the large included nut, tighten it, and once again remove any excess. Remember not to over tighten. Next is the tail piece that came with the drain. At this point, I can now drop the sink into place into the countertop opening. The tail piece was still a little short, so I bought a 6-inch extension and added that. Next thing to do is assemble and add the P-trap. To aid in providing a good seal, I will brush on some joint compound to the threaded ends. This will further help prevent leaks. First I added the provided nut and plastic gasket, then the P-trap, and screwed in place. Lastly, I connected the water lines to the corresponding valves, red to hot and blue to cold. Tighten by hand and then with a wrench. Now it's time to test. I added a bucket underneath just in case, and then opened up the valves by turning counterclockwise. Here goes nothing. So far so good, absolutely no leaks. Now I need to add some caulk around the vessel sink. This will provide a good seal and make the sink look much nicer. Vessel sinks aren't always perfectly even, so this will help blend the gap at the bottom. I am using a white waterproof caulk made for bathrooms. I simply added a large bead and then smoothed it with my finger. Then I used a wet rag to clean up the line a little bit. That's it for today's video. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found something in this helpful or at least a little inspirational to do something like this yourself. For my first time tiling and doing plumbing work, I think this was quite the success. This stuff really isn't as difficult as it seems as long as you do the right planning and research. Now I know the tile wall seems a bit unfinished, we still have that gap in the middle, so in the next video we're going to create a custom mirror with a frame and a ledge at the bottom, so stay tuned for that. Also in another video, I'm going to show you how I created a custom two-tone modern towel rack. So don't forget to subscribe and turn notifications on, that way you'll be notified when those next videos post. Take care everyone.